Hey everyone, today Tyler and I will be talking about Arthur Wellesley, the Iron Duke of Wellington. Arthur Wellesley was born May 1769 to the Earl and Countess of Mornington in Dublin, Ireland. In 1781, he attended school at Eton, and in that same year, his father died. Because of the financial burden laid on the family after his father's death, his mother took him out of school and enrolled him in private classes in Brussels. Arthur was not the brightest student and didn't get the best grades in class, and so his mother insisted that he be enrolled at a military college in Angers, France. Wellesley wasn't really interested in a military career. He had interests in music and in arts, but regardless, in 1785, Wellesley did attend the military college at Angers, France. In 1787, Arthur's brother, Lord Mornington, purchased him a commission as ensign in the 73rd Highland Regiment. This purchasing system allowed for the British Army to be maintained in the hands of the British elite, and it would ensure loyalty to the status quo of the British Empire. In 1794, Wellesley was promoted to Lieutenant Colonel of the 33rd Foot. With the 33rd Foot, he served at the Battle of Boxtel, and on the 15th of September 1794, they retreated from the River Awe. The lessons that Wellesley learned in this encounter was due to the command errors and disorganization. He learned how things should not be done. He learned of the need for accurate intelligence and command clarity. In 1797, Wellesley sailed to Calcutta with the 33rd Foot, where Wellesley's brother was appointed Governor General of Bengal in May of 1798. This may have played into Wellesley's success in India. In 1798, he led the 33rd Regiment against Tipu of Mysore with the Nizam of Hyderabad's army. The Tiger of Mysore, as Tipu was called, had been in negotiations with Napoleon, and he did maintain a French army. On April 5th, 1798, Wellesley was ordered to take the Sultan Petta Tope, which was an important position in the battle against the Mysore army. The Sultan Petta Tope was like a bamboo brush thicket, and it was near Seringapatam, which was the capital of Mysore at the time. In this encounter, he stumbled into enemy fire and became separated from his men. He was also wounded in the knee, and he lost 12 men in this in this fight. The next morning, April 6th, he regrouped with his men, and he did take the position. Throughout the battle against Mysore, Wellesley also learned about siege warfare, as the siege of Seringapatam was a very decisive battle and decisive conflict here. After the defeat of Tipu at Mysore in 1798, Wellesley was appointed governor of Seringapatam, and then in 1799 he was appointed governor of Mysore. In 1803, the victory at Asai was a very decisive and very famous victory won by Wellesley. In 1803, he had been promoted to Major General as well. And then at Asai, Wellesley was outnumbered 10-1, and forces under other commanders failed to had been delayed by the Indian guides who misled them. He was outnumbered 10-1. His forces had 20 cannon, while the Maratha forces at Asai had roughly 100. The forces were, and this battle was positioned between two rivers, where Wellesley had sent a scout to investigate whether or not there was a way over, specifically the Katina River. After he investigated himself, he did find a forge across the river, and he positioned the forces in between these two rivers so that the Maratha cavalry could not flank the forces and take out a lot of men in that way. This was a decisive victory on the 23rd of September 1803. Because of Wellesley's tactical decisions in this battle, he prevented the flanking of men on both sides, and then he drove the Mysore forces out of Asai by closing in there as Asai is backed up onto the Jua River. In this battle, he learned important lessons on the tactical maneuvers and dependable intelligence and layout of the land. As we said, as I already mentioned, the Indian scouts oftentimes misled forces and just used their layout of the land to divert the forces around or confuse the situation. In Wellesley's victory against the Maratha at Asai, he learned the importance of tactical maneuvers and dependable intelligence. This was again regarded as one of Wellesley's greatest victories, as he defeated these men on his own. In 1806, he returned to England and became a member of Parliament for Rye. On his personality and philosophy, Wellesley preferred decisive actions over abstract ideals. He liked to occupy high ground and then invite a stand-up fight. He was a firm believer in the success of Britain's imperialism, and he stood against the revolutionary ideals of Bonaparte and Jacobinism's radical democracy. In the wake of Britain's loss of its American colonies in 1783, its focus shifted on opening new trade markets and expanding the empire. India was really important, and Wellesley played a major role in that.
Hi there, historians. My name's Tyler Elker, and I'm going to be going over the Duke of Wesley's military campaigns throughout his career. I'm going to be starting with the first coalition, starting in 1792, and then I'm going to work my way through to the end of the Battle of Waterloo and his political career afterwards, as well as his accomplishments. So before his India campaigns, actually, he had started to be in charge of the 33rd Regiment in the first coalition against France after King Louis had died. So while Napoleon was not actually on this battlefield yet, he was still actually pursuing his military career. This was Wesley's first actual military encounters at the Battle of Boxtel. So the British had actually suffered a bunch of losses before this in northern France after a failed invasion of northern France. At the Battle of Boxtel, he was able to hold his ground for a relative period of time. However, the battle actually did end in defeat, and the first coalition was actually won by France. After his successes in India, Wesley was actually transferred to Denmark, where he fought a small contingent of Danish forces in 1807. Following months later, in 1808, the Peninsula War started between Portugal, Spain, and France. Napoleon had invaded Spain and actually put his brother Joseph Barnape as emperor for Spain. This created growing resentment between Portugal, Spain, and France. Britain saw this as an opportunity to not only engage Napoleon and his forces, but also score victories against France. Wellesley was deployed to Portugal in 1808. Britain came to the aid of Portugal and Spain and fought the French all over the Iberian Peninsula. Wellesley was promoted to lieutenant general and was sent to command forces there, and he was considered to be competent and cunning. He won at the Battle of Roliça and followed it up with the victory at Vimero. He became famous because of his ingenious tactic called the reverse slope tactic. Wellesley wanted to pursue the French, but the arrival of two officers who superseded his rank caused a change in the plan. They preferred to follow the Convention of Sintra in 1809 and allowed the French forces to withdraw from Portugal, including with all the loot and gear that they had. Wellesley's opposed this idea, and he was actually blamed and court-martialed for their retreat. But he was later acquitted without any wrongdoing. He returned to Ireland, where he further campaigned for further British intervention into the Peninsular War. After Wesley was acquitted, he returned to resume the fighting. However, it is also notable that during his 2 months of absence in 1809, Napoleon actually resumed the fighting against Britain and Portugal during his time he was away. However, the two would actually never meet, and their first and final battle would be at Waterloo 6 years later. When Wesley actually started resuming the fighting against France and Spain, it was a series of back and forth engagements. While he never necessarily lost the battle, he had to retreat constantly due to being overwhelmed by French forces. He did not lose much men and much artillery. However, this back and forth would resume for the next 3 years. It wasn't until other coalitions fighting against Napoleon did he actually start making ground into Spain. It was only at the the lines of Torres Vedras across the Lisbon Peninsula where he was actually able to grind down French forces and start a new type of defense of scorched earth policy. And this not only helped him succeed against French forces, it actually allowed his soldiers to have a renewed sense of trust in him. And he was nicknamed Nosy by his men for his short height, his perfect civilian clothing, and his brown hair and what considered to be brilliant blue eyes. His slowly growing army was not strong enough to capture the Spanish forces until 1812. Then, having defeated 40,000 Frenchmen within 40 minutes at Salamanca in 1814. He later had a siege against the fortress or city of Bourges. However, this failed and his army had to retreat once again into Portugal. However, he launched it again for the last time into Spain in May of 1813. The victory at Vitoria gave not only the European alliance a lot of strength and determination to defeat Napoleon, but a bunch of initial successes to be able to drive Napoleon back. When Wellington finally was able to move into northern Spain and toward the borders of France, in 1814, Napoleon actually had abdicated. After the Peninsular War, Napoleon had to abdicate to the island of Elba. However, he would return in 1815 to try and assemble the French army and attack the last coalition one last time to be able to secure the French Empire. Attempting to drive a wedge between his enemies, Napoleon had crossed the river Sambre on the 15th of June, 1815, entering what is now considered to be Belgium. The next day, the main part of his army had defeated the Prussians at the Battle of Ligny and drove them into retreat. The Prussians had lost over 20,000 men, and the French had lost half that number. However, Napoleon's army still remained at numbers around 74,000. That same day, Wellington beat off a separate French force at the crossroads of Cotabra. However, the Prussians' defeat had meant he also had to retreat or risk being overrun and overwhelmed, just like he had in the Peninsular War. Pursued by Napoleon's force, Wellington fell back to the village of Waterloo. Unknown to the French, however, the defeated Prussians actually remained a relatively strong combat strength despite their losses. The 48,000 strong Prussian army and experienced professionals, as well as Wellington's forces, were able to make a combined effort to stop Napoleon. However, the Prussians were lacking behind, and so Wellington engaged Napoleon first. Even though Wellington's forces had remained strong, the French began to have a sense of luck. They were able to hold the Duke of Wellington's troops that had been stationed at the center, which was a farm called La Haye, saint. This had made their position more advantageous and actually were beginning to push Wellington's forces back. However, around midday is when the Prussians arrived and turned the tide of the battle. In a last-ditch attempt, after heavy losses from both Prussians and Wellington's forces, Napoleon sent in his Imperial Guard. When all of the Imperial Guard were destroyed by Wellington and Blucher, this was pretty much the final straw, and Napoleon had to run in retreat. After the Napoleonic Wars had ended, Wellington actually pursued a political life the following year when he returned to England in 1819. Wellington joined the Lord of Liverpool's government as Master General of the Ordnance and went on a number of diplomatic visits to the continent. His political style was unsuited to the subtleties required by the particular situation in which he found himself after such a heavy victory. Yet he was able to establish a relatively strong career within the political realm. In 1828, King George IV asked Wellington to become prime minister and form a cabinet. During his time in office, Wellington was known for his conservative leanings and opposed most attempts at reform. He did, however, lead the way in the Catholic emancipation and granted Catholics almost full civic rights. Though his opposition in Parliament tarnished most of his public standing, by the time of his death he had recovered his status as a selfless and effective military leader worthy of all British honors. Now I'm going to talk about the positive and negative legacies of Wellington's military and political careers. Wellington's success throughout his life was based on learning from his past mistakes. In India, for instance, he would conduct these disastrous night raids, which made him reluctant to fight at night without proper reconnaissance. He also had problems with the Spanish and Portuguese allies during the Peninsular War, which made him reluctant to rely on any other forces or allied forces. This would also happen within the coalition, or the last coalition. His men had no affection for him. Though they loved him to a certain degree, they had and respected him to the highest regard because he took care of them, but he did not treat them. In battle, he also rode among them and would always be in the thickest part of the battle. Discipline was part of Wellington's highest priority for his soldiers. However, he would use harsh treatment against them, such as lashings, whippings, and other sorts of discipline toward his soldiers. While he was a good commander, this distrust of people and how he treated his wife should be anything close to being considered a gentleman or even a name such as the Duke of Wellington. Even though he was able to stop Napoleon, his character was not that of someone that should be highly regarded within the British realm, or at least within the British realm at that time. His political career was also labeled by affairs and gossip that were true but never really affected his career. While he was strong in trying to push certain legislation in Parliament and help any sort of civil rights activities, he would not be considered a strong politician today. He would stay in civil service until he was 80 years old in 1846 and would die in 1852, and officially ending his legacy.
In conclusion, Wellington's legacy lay primarily in his historic military career. From maintaining and defending the power of the East India Company to engaging the French in Portugal and his famous victory against Napoleon at Waterloo, his military excellence has made him a hero in Britain. He was rigid in politics, especially as Prime Minister of the Tory government in 1828. He was against reform as he expected his leadership to be obeyed and not challenged. Thanks for watching this video. Hope you have a good day.